Someone somewhere has angered some deity, and so now we have another entrant into the Disney live action lexicon with 2025's Lilo and Stitch. As much as it might be algorithmically beneficial for me to go line by line, scene by scene, and explain why the 2025 version could never touch the 2002 version, there's a much more pressing discussion that I want to talk about that somewhat relates to this film. The movie has already made a boatload of cash domestic, and it has a lot of people questioning, well, who is this for? Who's going to see this? Which many people very obviously remark, families with children. And then they retort, well, why? And that opens up a big old can of worms about the state of kids' media. Hi, I'm Bobby. This is Culture Kitsch. I'm on vacation, and today we're going to talk about why the state of kids' media is not good. Well, seemingly there is wider access to kids' media because of the introduction of the internet and streaming services. The kids' media industry has shrunk dramatically, from studios churning out less offerings for the kids and family market to some studios almost completely divesting from kids' content as a whole. So, this problem is a lot more complex than just kids' media is not as good as it was. And before we can get into what that actually is, let's talk about what it's not. And within this discussion, especially on film Twitter, I know. This is where a lot of this discussion was being had. There were a lot of people retorting to parents who were saying that they wish that there were more options for their kids in theaters by saying, well, there are plenty of movies out right now that are for kids. And in that lineup, they featured movies like Final Destination Bloodlines and Mission Impossible The Final Reckoning. And basically, their point is that Hollywood has made films that are essentially kid movies for so long that audiences have infantilized themselves. And so most movies out now are not made for adults. In fact, there was a very prominent tweet being made saying that the only movie out right now for adults is Sinners, where everything else is made for kids. Here's the issue. That's not the discussion we're having. That's a completely separate issue. You're waffling a pancake argument right now. So, that is a topic worthy of discussion, but that's not the discussion that we're currently having. Problem that they're discussing is kind of a disdain for superhero films, very IP driven franchises taking over screens at movie theaters, and those narratives being schlocky blockbuster popcorn films, or as Martin Scorsese called them, like amusement park films. And what they're talking about is the infiltration of that type of movie into the movie theater. Matt Singer for Screen Crush did an amazing article almost 2 years ago talking about this very same thing, addressing this exact point, showing that this has been a discussion that's been had over multiple years. This is a separate issue, and framing things this way means blaming one symptom for another. Both symptoms stem from the same problem. Increasingly, Hollywood only makes one kind of movie for theaters: superheroes, science fiction, big sequels, things based on massive IPs with built in audiences. And so movie theaters are full of many examples of one kind of movie. They're big and loud with lots of special effects and not much else. If I wanted to go on a date night to the multiplex with my wife to see something funny and romantic, I would have the same issue. There are a lot of factors as to the issue of the state of kids' media being what it is. And one of the biggest ones and most obvious is the infiltration of the internet and social media into kids based programming. Much in the way of the content that kids consume nowadays is made by other kids on apps such as YouTube or TikTok. Kids now, because of this, are able to consume media made by kids at a clip much faster than any studio producing linear television could ever keep up with. Every day, they can consume long form or short form media made by kids who look like them based on things like toys, slime, other such factors. Basically, the infiltration of social media into the kids programming space has caused a lot of what is very not so great about kids' media. And of course, it's not all bad because you have people like Miss Rachel who are known for creating content for kids that falls in line with the traditional kids programming that a lot of us grew up with via Sesame Street or much of the programming that was on PBS Kids. She is doing something very unique and very authentic and very real that seems to be curriculum based rather than just kind of being the equivalent of digital sugar for children. And then you have the issue of linear TV, which is both a symptom of kids media and also just a symptom of the industry at large. With the prioritization of streaming in our media landscape, linear TV is falling more and more out of favor as the years go by. Viewership on traditional kids channels like Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and Disney Channel have fallen greatly over the past 5 years, and that's because of things like streaming and also social media. It's not to say that there are no options on linear TV, because the existence of something like Bluey tells us that there is still content being made, but consider Bluey is the production of another country that has been imported into the United States. And ultimately, the industry is just not the same as it was. When you consider what was the heyday of kids programming, so the 90s and early 2000s, they were operating under much different rules than we are now. The main one being the Children's Act of 1990 and 1997 that had it to where broadcast channels were required to show educational content for the age group of 0 to 16 at least 3 hours per week. And that prioritization led to a lot of shows that were very educational and had some type of lesson to be learned from their programming, which ultimately does up the quality. Not to say that it was perfect, but it's better than something that is just meant to be straight entertainment versus having some educational value. This also goes into the whole idea of there being kind of a deprioritization of edutainment, and not just in TV, not just in film, but also in physical spaces as well. The idea of learning while you're being entertained is something that is falling out of vogue in a sense. An amazing journalist and one of my mutuals, BJ Colangelo, wrote for Slash Film about this very topic, and she goes into depth about how the Children's Television Act of 1990 was meant to usher in kind of a whole new era of television that was meant to be educational and entertaining. And it did mandate that there was educational programming, but almost as soon as that act was introduced, it was messed with by the channels to try and circumvent having to make educational content for a period of time. The Children's Television Act is also seen as one of the reasons why we don't really have the Saturday morning cartoon block. If you're aware of Saturday morning cartoons, this is a concept, a media concept that was very prevalent in the 70s and 80s for having Saturday mornings be basically solely dedicated to hours of kids programming in the way of cartoons that were oftentimes IP based, and oftentimes it encourages viewers to buy accompanying cereals, toys, things of that nature. They were solely meant to be entertainment. However, the Children's Television Act was something that has been kind of held up and down in the air for the past couple of years, and especially has basically been rolled back almost fully in the past 5 years. You have a lot of deregulation from a federal level with the Children's Television Act of 1990, 1997, and then 2019. But then also, too, because of the Trump administration, you have a lot of defunding of traditional avenues for children's programming. So you have a lot of defunding of places like PBS. And PBS is a channel that has always been of great contention and has always have its funding cut like it is right now. A lot of this is worth discussion in a much more in-depth way, and I plan on doing that, but I did want to talk about this situation as being kind of a cacophony of a lot of bad circumstances. There's been a lot of deregulation in kids programming and how television channels have to function within the realm of providing kids programming, where it was once a heavy priority, it's now been deprioritized in a pretty major way. And because of that, that means a lot of studios don't really have to try hard when it comes to kids programming. Essentially, the state of kids media is marked by a lot of deregulation, deprioritization, and just a whole lot of people not paying attention to what's being made right now. Many things are being put in front of kids right now And there is a sense with streaming that you do have to choose what you watch. So essentially, parents are understanding of the things that their kids are watching. But in a society that is asking so much of everyone, including parents, it's not always the easiest thing to do to watch every single thing your child is consuming. And the internet makes it really easy, even with parameters put forth by certain streaming platforms and social media apps to quote unquote keep kids safe with kids only accounts or kids technically being banned from some social media accounts. Kids are only becoming more and more digitally savvy and are able to circumvent those parameters rather easily. On the internet, they are able to access media that seems like it's for kids. And it's even been discussed that something like YouTube Kids still finds a way to have programming that is certainly not for kids on it. So I'm saying all of this, I've explained all of this. Why is it important? Why me, someone who doesn't have kids, why is this important to me and why should it be important to you? You have to understand that kids media is one of the most important sectors of the media industry, and what happens to it will certainly eventually affect all media as a whole. Kids media is so important because it is the foundation for how we consume media. So, of course, shows like Blue's Clues and Sesame Street and Between the Lions teach you things like reading, writing, and even soft skills like compassion, friendship, cooperation. But covertly, you're also learning how to watch something for the very first time. Babies fresh out of the womb who can't really see far beyond 2 feet in front of their faces have to learn how to consume media. Just in the way that they learn how to read physical books, they also have to learn how to read a screen, to read a scene, to read a narrative in a visual medium if they can. These shows basically aid in that fact. And once you graduate from one sector, you move on to the next group. So once you've aged out of early childhood programming, you then age into kid programming. So the things you would find on Nickelodeon, whether it be animated programming or live action. And then from there, you graduate on to teen or tween programming, which is a little bit more narratively complex, has characters that are a little bit more narratively complex, but it ultimately can still reach you at that age. And then from there, you graduate to media for adults. So if kids are being deprioritized, that means that the next generation of adults are not being set up for success to be able to really take in adult programming, which means that adult programming is going to suffer. So, for those of you who feel very strongly that there is no media made for adults lately, if kids programming is deprioritized, that fact is going to get even worse. Consider that what happens to kids affects all of us. Beyond all of that, kids are worthy of good media. Kids are worthy of spaces in which they can go and enjoy good media. I think there's a real emphasis, and this is talked about in the Screen Crush piece, but it feels like a lot of people's solution to this kids' media problem is simply for the kids to wait it out, to simply wait in the shadows until the problem by osmosis solves itself. But the problem is, kids are still people in the meantime. Kids are people deserving of good stories, deserving of good characters, deserving of going out into public spaces, being visibly seen as a child. I think a lot of these issues stem back to our sense of anti community sentiment that has been kind of cropping up a lot here lately, and there being this idea that we don't oftentimes understand that kids are people too. I will leave you with a point that was made by BJ in her article. Quote, of course, cultural enrichment beyond the multiplexes matter, museums, libraries, zoos, parks, etc. But weaponizing deprivation, as some folks are currently suggesting as a way to punish Disney into making more original films, is ethically bankrupt because it requires children to bear the consequences of capitalism's failures and studios' creatively conservative cowardice. Expecting parents to boycott the only family film available feels less like a protest and more like a form of punitive abstinence that punishes children for the failures of intentional structural trappings laid by the industry. Quote, vote with your dollar only works when there's another option. These things are very important, and I think it's worthy of discussion. And I'd love to know what you guys think in the comments down below. As always, I'm Bobby. This is Culture Kitsch. I do not have an outro, but I will see you next week.